The rusted Bell UH-1 Huey helicopter sitting on the tarmac at Miami-Dade Emergency Operations Center looked like it belonged in a museum rather than an active rescue fleet. Its faded olive drab paint was chipped and weathered, revealing patches of bare metal that gleamed dully in the humid Florida morning sun. The aircraft's rotor blades drooped like tired wings, and hydraulic fluid had left dark stains on the concrete beneath its belly. To the assembled team of emergency responders preparing for Hurricane Miranda's anticipated landfall, the vintage helicopter represented everything outdated about their cash-strapped operation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Leonora Hollins emerged from the pilot's lounge at exactly 7:45 a.m., her steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun that had seen better days. At 62, she moved with the deliberate care of someone whose joints reminded her daily of decades spent in cramped cockpits and rough landings. Her khaki flight suit was clean but well-worn, bearing patches from civilian helicopter services that most of the younger pilots had never heard of. The name tape across her chest read simply, L. Hollins, in faded black letters, giving no hint of the extraordinary career that had brought her to this moment. The morning briefing was already underway in the hangar when Leonora slipped quietly through the back entrance, her presence barely registering among the 24 emergency personnel focused on Chief Flight Coordinator Marcus Rodriguez's weather presentation. Rodriguez, a former Navy pilot whose crisp uniform and confident bearing commanded immediate respect, gestured toward a massive projection screen showing Hurricane Miranda's projected path as an ominous red spiral approaching the Florida coast. Current sustained winds are holding at 165 miles per hour, with gusts exceeding 190, Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. The National Hurricane Center has upgraded Miranda to a Category 5 storm, making it potentially the most destructive hurricane to hit South Florida in recorded history. All civilian aircraft are grounded, and even our newest rescue helicopters are questionable for operations once winds exceed 100 miles per hour. Leonora found an empty folding chair near the equipment lockers, her weathered hands folding quietly in her lap as she listened to the briefing with the focused attention of someone who understood that weather reports could mean the difference between successful missions and catastrophic failures. Around her, younger pilots shifted nervously in their seats, their expressions reflecting the kind of tension that comes with facing conditions that exceed normal training parameters. Deputy Chief Sarah Bennett, whose administrative role often put her at odds with field operations personnel, raised her hand with the bureaucratic precision that had earned her both respect and resentment throughout the department. Chief Rodriguez, given these extreme conditions, shouldn't we be coordinating with the National Guard or Coast Guard rather than risking our limited aircraft and personnel on missions that exceed our operational capabilities? Rodriguez's response revealed the frustration of someone forced to work with inadequate resources while facing unlimited demands for assistance. Deputy Chief Bennett, the Guard and Coast Guard are already overwhelmed with evacuation operations along the entire eastern seaboard. We're dealing with a storm system that spans nearly 400 miles, and every available aircraft is committed to moving people out of the projected impact zone. If we get calls for emergency rescue operations during the storm, we'll be operating with whatever equipment we have available. The uncomfortable silence that followed Bennett's question was broken by the sound of Leonora's chair scraping against the concrete floor as she stood to examine the aircraft assignment board mounted near the briefing area. Her movement was unhurried but purposeful, drawing curious glances from personnel who hadn't noticed her arrival. The board showed pilot assignments for the department's fleet of rescue helicopters, ranging from modern Eurocopter AS-350S to aging Bell 206 Jet Rangers. each aircraft paired with crews based on experience levels and mission requirements. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, whose youth and aggressive confidence had earned him assignments to the department's newest and most capable aircraft, noticed Leonora, studying the board with obvious interest. Morrison's flight suit bore patches indicating advanced rescue training, and his bearing suggested someone who believed his recent military experience qualified him for any challenge the civilian world might present. "Ma'am, are you looking for something specific?" Morrison asked, his tone walking the line between helpful courtesy and subtle condescension. "If you're here for the administrative briefing, that's scheduled for later this afternoon in the conference room." Leonora turned toward Morrison with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, her expression carrying the patient amusement of someone who had encountered similar assumptions countless times throughout her career. "Actually, Lieutenant Morrison, I'm here for flight operations assignment. I believe I'm scheduled for aircraft 47 Delta." Morrison's reaction was immediate and telling, his confident expression shifting to confusion as he processed the implications of what Leonora had just said. Aircraft 47 Delta was the designation for the aging Huey helicopter that served as the department's backup aircraft, rarely used except for training flights and situations where more capable helicopters weren't available. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion," Morrison replied, his voice carrying the diplomatic patience of someone explaining an obvious mistake to a civilian who clearly didn't understand military protocols. "Aircraft assignments are made based on pilot qualifications and mission requirements. The briefing you're looking for is probably in the administrative section." The conversation was attracting attention from other personnel in the hangar, including Chief Rodriguez, who had noticed the discussion while wrapping up his weather presentation. Rodriguez approached the group with the measured steps of someone whose command responsibilities required him to investigate any potential confusion that might affect operational readiness. "Is there a problem here?" Rodriguez asked, his tone neutral but carrying the authority of someone accustomed to resolving conflicts quickly and efficiently. His glance toward Leonora suggested mild curiosity about a civilian presence in a restricted operational area during emergency preparations. Leonora reached into her flight suit pocket with deliberate slowness, producing a worn leather wallet that contained her pilot credentials and identification documents. The credentials she handed to Rodriguez were comprehensive and current, showing helicopter ratings that exceeded those of most military pilots and civilian certifications that covered aircraft types, ranging from light training helicopters to heavy lift industrial machines. "Chief Rodriguez, I'm Leonora Hollins, contracted pilot reporting for emergency operations assignment," she explained, her voice carrying quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the assumptions that had been made about her capabilities. "My understanding is that I've been assigned to aircraft 47 Delta for potential rescue operations during the hurricane." Rodriguez examined Leonora's credentials with the careful attention of someone whose experience had taught him that appearances could be deceiving in ways that proved costly during emergency operations. Her ratings were extensive and current, showing proficiency with helicopter types that included Vietnam-era aircraft as well as modern civilian and military machines. More intriguingly, her total flight hours exceeded those of most pilots he had worked with during his entire career. "Mrs. Hollins, these credentials are impressive," Rodriguez acknowledged, though his tone suggested ongoing uncertainty about the situation. "However, I have to ask about your familiarity with our specific operational procedures and equipment. Emergency rescue operations during hurricane conditions require specialized training and experience that goes beyond normal civilian flying." Morrison's interruption revealed the kind of protective skepticism that experienced pilots develop toward outsiders who claimed capabilities that seemed inconsistent with their appearance. "Chief Rodriguez, with respect, aircraft 47 Delta hasn't been used for actual rescue operations in over 2 years. That helicopter is barely airworthy under normal conditions, and the idea of using it during hurricane-force winds seems like exactly the kind of risk we should be avoiding. Leonora's response to Morrison's concerns demonstrated both technical knowledge and the diplomatic patience of someone accustomed to proving her capabilities to skeptical colleagues. "Lieutenant Morrison, I understand your concerns about aircraft 47 Delta's condition and capabilities. However, older aircraft often possess certain advantages during extreme weather operations that newer, more sophisticated machines lack. Sometimes simplicity and proven design characteristics matter more than advanced avionics and computerized systems." The hangar had grown quiet as personnel stopped their preparations to listen to what was becoming a fascinating discussion about aircraft capabilities and pilot qualifications. Several senior pilots who had been reviewing mission protocols found themselves drawn to the conversation, their professional curiosity piqued by Leonora's confident assessment of the aging helicopter's potential. Deputy Chief Bennett approached the group with the administrative authority that her position required her to exercise during situations involving personnel assignments and operational decisions. "Chief Rodriguez, I need to understand how Mrs. Hollins came to be assigned to our operations. Emergency contractor arrangements require approval through proper channels, and I don't recall processing any requests for additional pilot services." Rodriguez consulted his tablet computer, scrolling through personnel assignments and contractor agreements with the focused attention of someone searching for information that would clarify a potentially problematic situation. His expression shifted from confusion to surprise as he located the relevant documentation. According to the records, Mrs. Hollins was specifically requested by the Federal Emergency Management Agency as part of their enhanced response protocol for Category 5 hurricane operations. Rodriguez explained, his voice carrying the slight amazement of someone discovering information that changed his understanding of the situation. "Her assignment comes with federal authority that supersedes normal departmental protocols." The revelation that Leonora's presence was the result of federal intervention rather than local hiring decisions created a new dynamic among the assembled personnel. Federal involvement suggested capabilities and experience that exceeded normal civilian contractor qualifications, though her appearance and demeanor continued to contrast sharply with expectations about elite emergency response personnel. Leonora sensed a shift in atmosphere and decided to address the underlying concerns that were affecting everyone's comfort with the situation. "I understand that my assignment might seem unusual given current circumstances. However, I can assure you that my experience with helicopter operations in extreme weather conditions is extensive and directly relevant to the challenges we're likely to face during Hurricane Miranda." As if summoned by the mention of challenging weather conditions, a sudden gust of wind rattled the hangar doors, reminding everyone present that Hurricane Miranda was approaching with unprecedented intensity and that theoretical discussions about pilot qualifications would soon be tested by conditions that would challenge even the most experienced aviators. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, the maintenance hangar where Leonora conducted her inspection of aircraft 47. Delta told a story of budget cuts and deferred repairs that would have alarmed anyone familiar with aviation safety standards. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows across workbenches cluttered with parts cannibalized from other aircraft. The smell of hydraulic fluid and old metal permeated the air, mixing with the humidity that seeped through gaps in the aging building's weather seals. Maintenance Chief Tommy Brennan emerged from beneath a Bell 206's engine cowling, his coveralls stained with grease, and his expression carrying the perpetual frustration of someone asked to maintain aircraft with inadequate resources. At 45, Brennan had spent 2 decades keeping emergency helicopters airworthy through a combination of mechanical skill and creative problem-solving that often push the boundaries of regulatory compliance. You must be the pilot they assigned. To the old Huey, Brennan said, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. His tone carried the weary resignation of someone who had watched too many pilots dismiss aircraft that didn't meet their expectations for modern comfort and capability. I'll be honest with you, ma'am, that bird's got more miles on her than most commercial airliners, and she's not exactly what you'd call user-friendly by today's standards. Leonora approached the Huey with the deliberate assessment of someone whose survival had often depended on understanding aircraft condition through careful observation rather than relying on documentation that might not reflect reality. Her hands traced the helicopter's surface with practiced familiarity, checking for stress cracks, corrosion, and the subtle signs of wear that could indicate potential failure points under extreme conditions. Chief Brennan, what's the maintenance history on this aircraft's transmission and rotor system? Leonora asked, her fingers exploring the areas around critical attachment points with obvious knowledge of where problems typically developed. Have there been any recurring issues with vibration or unusual wear patterns that might affect performance during high-stress operations? Brennan's response revealed both professional pride and the defensive posture of someone whose work was constantly questioned by people who didn't understand the challenges of maintaining aging aircraft with limited budgets. Ma'am, I've been keeping that Huey flying for 8 years, and she's never failed to complete a mission when properly handled. The transmission was overhauled 18 months ago, and all the rotor components are within service limits according to manufacturer specifications. What Brennan didn't mention, and what Leonora's experienced eye was beginning to detect, were the subtle modifications and non-standard repairs that had been implemented to keep the helicopter operational, despite parts shortages and budget constraints. A replacement hydraulic line showed signs of being slightly longer than original specifications, suggesting adaptation when exact replacement parts weren't available. The collective control mechanism had been adjusted beyond normal parameters, indicating compensation for wear that should have triggered component replacement. Chief Brennan, I noticed some interesting modifications to the flight control systems, Leonora observed, her tone carefully neutral to avoid triggering defensive responses that might limit the information she could gather. These appear to be field expedient repairs rather than factory-approved modifications. Can you walk me through the reasoning behind these changes? Brennan's expression shifted from defensive pride to cautious respect as he recognized that Leonora's questions demonstrated technical knowledge that exceeded normal pilot training. Her ability to identify specific modifications suggested experience with aircraft maintenance that went far beyond routine pre-flight inspections. You know helicopters, Brennan acknowledged, his tone warming slightly as he recognized a fellow professional who understood the challenges of keeping complex machines operational under difficult circumstances. Those modifications were necessary to compensate for parts availability issues. The original specifications called for components that cost more than our entire monthly maintenance budget, so we had to get creative with approved alternatives. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Flight Operations Supervisor Janet Walsh, whose administrative responsibilities included oversight of contractor pilot integration and mission assignment protocols. Walsh's clipboard and official bearing marked her as someone more comfortable with paperwork than aircraft, though her position required her to coordinate between maintenance personnel and flight crews. Mrs. Hollins, I need to complete your operational briefing and equipment familiarization before you can be cleared for mission assignment, Walsh announced, her tone carrying the bureaucratic authority of someone ensuring that proper procedures were followed regardless of external pressures. Federal contractor status requires additional documentation and safety briefings beyond our normal pilot orientation. Leonora nodded with appropriate compliance while continuing her inspection of the Huey's critical systems, her hands checking cable tensions and control responses with movements that suggested muscle memory developed through years of similar assessments. Supervisor Walsh, I appreciate the thoroughness of your safety protocols. While we handle the paperwork, would it be possible to review this aircraft's recent flight logs and maintenance records? Walsh's hesitation revealed the kind of administrative caution that develops when budget pressures force compromises that might not withstand detailed scrutiny. Mrs. Hollins, our maintenance records are comprehensive and current according to all regulatory requirements. However, some of our operational procedures reflect the unique challenges of emergency services funding and might require explanation to someone unfamiliar with our specific circumstances. The maintenance records that Walsh reluctantly produced told a story that Leonora recognized from her experience with organizations struggling to maintain operational capability despite inadequate resources. Flight hours had been carefully managed to avoid triggering mandatory inspections that couldn't be afforded. Routine maintenance had been deferred whenever possible, and replacement parts had been substituted with alternatives that met minimum specifications rather than optimal performance standards. I see that Aircraft 47 Delta has been primarily used for training and administrative flights over the past 2 years, Leonora noted, her tone remaining neutral despite growing concerns about the helicopter's readiness for emergency operations. Have there been any recent flights in challenging weather conditions that might indicate how the aircraft performs under stress? Brennan's answer revealed both professional frustration and the practical compromises that characterized underfunded emergency services operations. Ma'am, we don't fly that bird in anything worse than light rain and moderate winds. The newer aircraft handle the rough stuff because they've got better instruments and more reliable systems. The Huey gets used when everything else is down for maintenance or when we need something simple for routine missions. The implications of Brennan's statement were clear and troubling. The helicopter that Leonora was being assigned for potential hurricane rescue operations had been deliberately avoided for challenging weather conditions by pilots familiar with its capabilities and limitations. The aircraft was being treated as a backup option suitable only for routine missions under favorable conditions. Chief Brennan, in your professional opinion, what would be the limiting factors for this aircraft? During high-wind operations? Leonora asked, her question designed to gather information that would be crucial for mission planning, while avoiding accusations that might make maintenance personnel defensive about their work. Brennan's response demonstrated both technical honesty and the protective loyalty that experienced mechanics develop toward aircraft they've kept operational through skill and determination. The Huey's got limitations, but she's also got advantages that newer aircraft don't have. She's simple, reliable, and forgiving if you know how to handle her. The problem is that most pilots today are trained on aircraft with computer assistance and automatic systems, so they don't know how to fly something that requires actual piloting skills. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of increasing wind velocity outside the hangar, accompanied by the first drops of rain that indicated Hurricane Miranda's outer bands were beginning to affect the Miami area. Weather conditions that had been theoretical during the morning briefing were becoming reality, transforming discussions about aircraft capability from academic exercises into immediate operational concerns. Supervisor Walsh consulted her tablet computer with growing urgency as updated weather reports confirmed that Hurricane Miranda was maintaining Category 5 intensity while approaching the Florida coast ahead of predicted schedule. Mrs. Hollins, we need to complete your briefing immediately. Current projections suggest we have less than 6 hours before conditions become too severe for any aircraft operations. Leonora's response revealed priorities that differed significantly from administrative convenience and bureaucratic compliance. Supervisor Walsh, I need to complete a thorough pre-flight inspection and systems check before accepting responsibility for this aircraft. Federal contractor status doesn't eliminate the requirement for proper safety verification, especially given the conditions we're likely to encounter. The pre-flight inspection that followed showcased knowledge and attention to detail that impressed even Brennan, whose experience with pilots had taught him to distinguish between those who understood aircraft systems and those who simply went through required motions. Leonora's examination was methodical and comprehensive, covering systems and components that most pilots never bothered to check personally. "Mrs. Hollins, you're checking things that I usually only see inspected during annual overhauls," Brennan observed, his tone reflecting growing respect for Leonora's technical expertise. Most pilots trust the maintenance crew to handle the detailed stuff and focus on basic operational checks. Leonora's response revealed both professional humility and the hard-earned wisdom of someone whose survival had depended on personal verification of critical systems. "Chief Brennan, I've learned that understanding your aircraft's condition can make the difference between completing a mission and becoming part of the emergency that someone else has to respond to. When you're flying in conditions that push equipment to its limits, there's no substitute for knowing exactly what you're working with." The inspection revealed several issues that concerned Leonora, but weren't necessarily disqualifying for routine operations. Slight play in the tail rotor control system that suggested bearing wear, hydraulic pressure readings at the lower end of acceptable ranges, and engine performance parameters that indicated the need for adjustment rather than immediate replacement. These were the kinds of problems that experienced pilots learn to manage rather than eliminate, particularly when working with older aircraft and limited maintenance budgets. "Chief Brennan, what's your honest assessment of this aircraft's reliability for extended operations in challenging conditions?" Leonora asked, her question carrying the weight of someone whose decisions would affect not only her own safety, but potentially the lives of people depending on successful rescue operations. Brennan's answer reflected the complex relationship between mechanical reality and operational necessity that characterized emergency services throughout the country. "Ma'am, that Huey will fly as long as you treat her right and don't ask for more than she's designed to give. She's not fancy, but she's proven, and in the right hands, she can accomplish missions that would challenge aircraft costing 10 times as much. The question isn't whether she can do the job, it's whether you know how to let her do what she does best." As Leonora completed her inspection and began planning for potential emergency operations, the increasing intensity of wind and rain outside served as a constant reminder that Hurricane Miranda was approaching with unprecedented force, and that theoretical discussions about aircraft capability would soon be tested under conditions that would challenge both machine and pilot to their absolute limits. The Emergency Operations Center at Miami-Dade Emergency Services buzzed with controlled chaos as Hurricane Miranda's approach triggered protocols that hadn't been tested since Hurricane Andrew devastated South Florida 3 decades earlier. Banks of computer monitors displayed real-time weather data, evacuation routes, and resource allocation spreadsheets that painted a sobering picture of a system stretched beyond its design limits. The coffee-stained conference table where department heads gathered for their crisis briefing was surrounded by officials whose expressions reflected the weight of decisions that could affect hundreds of thousands of lives. Director Patricia Hammond stood at the head of the table, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her no-nonsense approach to emergency management. At 58, Hammond had guided the department through budget cuts that had reduced personnel by 30%, while emergency call volumes increased year after year. Her weathered hands gestured toward projection screens showing Hurricane Miranda's massive spiral structure as she addressed the assembled supervisors with the grim professionalism of someone delivering news that everyone already suspected. Current modeling shows Miranda making landfall as a Category 5 hurricane with sustained winds exceeding 175 miles per hour, Hammond announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose career had been built on making impossible decisions with inadequate resources. Storm surge projections range from 18 to 25 feet in coastal areas, with inland flooding expected to render most traditional rescue methods ineffective for at least 48 hours after passage. Budget Coordinator Frank Morrison, whose spreadsheets and cost-benefit analyses had driven most of the department's recent equipment decisions, shifted uncomfortably in his chair as the implications of Hammond's briefing became clear. Morrison's background in municipal finance had prepared him to manage emergency services like any other city department, focusing on efficiency metrics and cost containment rather than operational capability during catastrophic events. Director Hammond, our current aircraft inventory reflects fiscally responsible management of taxpayer resources, Morrison interjected, his tone carrying the defensive precision of someone whose decisions were being implicitly questioned. The newer helicopters provide cost-effective operations for 95% of our mission requirements, and maintaining older aircraft like the Huey represents an unnecessary expense for capabilities that are rarely needed. Hammond's response revealed the tension between financial management and operational readiness that had characterized emergency services throughout the region as budget pressures forced compromises that looked reasonable on paper but proved inadequate during actual crises. Mr. Morrison, Hurricane Miranda represents the 5% of missions where capability matters more than cost-effectiveness. When people are trapped in conditions that ground our primary aircraft, we need options that can operate beyond normal safety parameters. The uncomfortable silence that followed Hammond's statement was broken by Deputy Chief Operations Officer Lieutenant Colonel James Wright, whose military background had taught him to distinguish between peacetime efficiency and wartime necessity. Wright's experience with combat operations in challenging environments had made him increasingly concerned about the department's emphasis on cost savings over operational redundancy. Director Hammond, I've been reviewing our incident reports from the past 5 years, and there's a disturbing pattern emerging, Wright announced, consulting a tablet computer that displayed statistics highlighting the gap between emergency service demands and actual response capability. We've had 17 incidents where weather conditions prevented helicopter operations, resulting in delayed rescues and 3 preventable fatalities. Morrison's immediate objection revealed the bureaucratic thinking that had guided equipment procurement decisions throughout the region as federal funding decreased while regulatory requirements continued to expand. Lieutenant Colonel Wright, those incidents represent statistical outliers that don't justify maintaining expensive backup systems. Modern risk management focuses on optimizing resources for typical operational scenarios rather than preparing for worst-case situations that may never occur. The debate between Wright and Morrison represented a fundamental philosophical divide that affected emergency services throughout the country, whether to optimize for normal operations or maintain capability for extreme situations that occurred infrequently, but carried catastrophic consequences when response systems proved inadequate. This tension had shaped procurement decisions that prioritized efficiency over redundancy, creating vulnerabilities that became apparent only during maximum stress scenarios. Flight operations. Supervisor Janet Walsh entered the briefing room carrying files that contained information about contractor pilot arrangements and aircraft assignments, her expression suggesting someone bearing news that would complicate already difficult planning decisions. Director Hammond, I need to brief you on some developments regarding our backup aircraft operations and contractor pilot assignments. Hammond gestured for Walsh to proceed, though her expression indicated that additional complications were the last thing needed during planning for what was already shaping up to be the most challenging emergency response in the department's history. Supervisor Walsh, please tell me we're not facing additional personnel or equipment shortages that will affect our operational capability. Walsh's briefing revealed information that transformed the meeting's focus from abstract policy discussions to immediate operational Concerns with personal implications that reached back decades into Hammond's own career history. Director Hammond. Our contractor pilot Leonora Hollins has been conducting detailed inspections of aircraft 47 Delta, and her preliminary assessment suggests that the helicopter may be more capable for extreme weather operations than our current protocols indicate. The mention of Leonora Hollins triggered a visible reaction from Hammond, whose expression shifted from professional attention to personal recognition, tinged with emotions that she struggled to control. Hammond's hands gripped the edge of the conference table as memories surfaced that connected the current crisis to events that had shaped her entire approach to emergency management. Supervisor Walsh, did you say Leonora Hollins? Hammond asked, her voice carrying undertones that suggested the name held significance beyond routine contractor arrangements. Can you confirm the spelling of that name and provide me with her complete credential documentation? Walsh consulted her tablet computer with growing confusion as she processed Hammond's unexpected reaction to what should have been routine administrative information. Director Hammond, the contractors listed as Leonora M. Hollins, Federal Emergency Response Pilot with extensive helicopter experience in extreme weather operations. Her credentials show qualifications that exceed normal civilian pilot training, though some of the documentation references programs that I'm not familiar with. The revelation that Leonora Hollins was involved in current operations triggered memories that Hammond had spent 30 years trying to suppress. Memories of decisions made during Hurricane Andrew that had cost lives and destroyed careers while teaching harsh lessons about the difference between theoretical emergency planning and actual disaster response. Hammond's careful composure began to crack as she processed the implications of Leonora's presence during another catastrophic hurricane. Lieutenant Colonel Wright, I need you to immediately review all files related to Hurricane Andrew response operations, specifically focusing on helicopter rescue missions conducted during the storm's passage, Hammond ordered, her voice carrying an urgency that transformed the meeting's atmosphere from routine planning to crisis management. I also need complete background verification for contractor pilot Hollins, including any federal designations or special authorizations that might not be included in standard personnel files. Morrison's confusion reflected the perspective of someone whose administrative focus had never extended to historical emergency response operations or the personal relationships that shaped current policy decisions. Director Hammond, I don't understand why historical hurricane response is bearing on current contractor arrangements. Our focus should be on optimizing available resources for projected mission requirements. Hammond's response revealed emotions and professional history that had been carefully hidden beneath decades of bureaucratic composure, transforming her from efficient administrator to someone grappling with personal ghosts that had suddenly materialized during the worst possible circumstances. Mr. Morrison, Hurricane Andrew taught me that emergency response isn't about optimizing resources. It's about having the right people and equipment available when everything else fails. Leonora Hollins represents capabilities that we may desperately need, but her presence also indicates that this situation is more serious than our normal planning parameters suggest. Wright's research into Hurricane Andrew files revealed information that explained Hammond's reaction while raising new questions about the federal arrangements that had brought Leonora into current operations. Director Hammond, the Andrew files show that pilot Leonora Hollins conducted multiple rescue missions during the hurricane using aircraft that other pilots had declared inoperable. Her missions resulted in saving 47 lives, but the operations were conducted without official authorization and in violation of established safety protocols. The historical context that Wright's research provided transformed the current crisis from administrative challenge to personal confrontation with decisions and consequences that had shaped Hammond's entire career philosophy. During Hurricane Andrew, Hammond had been a junior operations officer whose by-the-book approach to safety protocols had prevented helicopter operations that Leonora had conducted independently, resulting in successful rescues that officially never happened. "Supervisor Walsh, I need immediate contact with contractor pilot Hollins," Hammond ordered, her voice carrying the weight of someone preparing to address unfinished business that had haunted her professional conscience for 3 decades. "I also need complete mission briefings for all potential rescue scenarios that might require helicopter operations during Hurricane Miranda's passage." Morrison's growing alarm reflected his recognition that financial planning and cost-benefit analysis provided no framework for understanding the personal and professional dynamics that were beginning to influence operational decisions. "Director Hammond, I need to understand how historical events and personal relationships affect current resource allocation and contractor management. Our fiscal oversight responsibilities require transparency in decision-making processes." Hammond's answer revealed the fundamental limitation of bureaucratic management when applied to emergency operations that transcended normal organizational boundaries and safety parameters. "Mr. Morrison, some decisions can't be reduced to spreadsheets and risk assessment matrices. When people are dying in conditions that ground normal aircraft, you need pilots who understand that mission accomplishment sometimes requires accepting risks that no reasonable person would take under normal circumstances." The briefing was interrupted by emergency communications reporting that Hurricane Miranda had intensified beyond all previous projections, with sustained winds now exceeding 180 miles per hour and forward motion that would bring landfall 12 hours ahead of schedule. The accelerated timeline meant that evacuation operations were already behind schedule, and emergency response assets were facing deployment in conditions that exceeded design parameters. For equipment throughout the region, all personnel, this is no longer a planned emergency response, Hammond announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose experience with catastrophic events had taught her to recognize when normal procedures became inadequate. Hurricane Miranda is now officially the strongest storm ever recorded approaching the Florida coast. We are transitioning to survival operations, where mission success will depend on individual initiative and capabilities that can't be measured by normal standards. As the meeting dissolved into urgent preparations for unprecedented emergency operations, the central question remained unresolved: whether Leonora Hollins and her death trap helicopter represented the kind of backup capability that could save lives when everything else failed, or whether her presence indicated that the situation had deteriorated beyond the point where any reasonable response was possible. The storm approaching from the Atlantic had become more than a weather event. It was a test of systems, equipment, and people that would reveal whether decades of cost-cutting and efficiency optimization had created capabilities adequate for genuine catastrophe, or whether the pursuit of fiscal responsibility had eliminated the redundancy and resilience that emergency response required. When normal methods proved insufficient, the Emergency Communications Center erupted into coordinated chaos at 2:17 p.m. when the first distress call arrived from Mercy General Hospital's storm-stranded medical team. Communications specialist Rosa Martinez had been monitoring radio frequencies for routine evacuation updates when the panicked voice of Dr. Sarah Chun cut through the static with words that transformed Hurricane Miranda from approaching threat to immediate catastrophe. Miami Emergency Operations. This is Dr. Chen at Mercy General Hospital Emergency Medical Station, Alpha 7. The transmission crackled through speakers that filled the operations center with the sound of wind and rain that seemed impossibly intense for a storm still hours from official landfall. We have a critical situation requiring immediate helicopter evacuation. Repeat, we need immediate helicopter evacuation for trauma patients who cannot survive transport delay. Martinez's fingers flew across her console as she established contact protocols while simultaneously alerting supervisors to what was clearly developing into the kind of emergency that tested every aspect of their response capabilities. Her 12 years of experience handling crisis communications had taught her to distinguish between routine emergency calls and situations that required immediate escalation to command authority. Mercy General Alpha 7, this is Miami Emergency Operations, Martinez responded, her voice maintaining professional calm, despite growing concern about the conditions described in Dr. Chien's transmission. Please provide patient count, medical condition details, and current location status for evacuation planning. Be advised that current weather conditions may affect response timeline and capabilities. Dr. Chun's response painted a picture of medical crisis that was complicated by weather conditions that had deteriorated beyond all predictions and planning assumptions. Miami Emergency. We have 6 trauma patients including 2 pediatric cases requiring immediate surgical intervention that cannot be performed at our storm shelter location. Hospital main facility lost power and structural integrity 2 hours ago, forcing evacuation to this emergency treatment station. Current location is the hospital's rooftop helipad, approximately 40 feet above ground level with limited wind. Protection. The implications of Dr. Chen's situation report were immediately clear to everyone monitoring the communications. Patients who required life-saving medical care were trapped in a location that would be completely inaccessible once Hurricane Miranda's full force arrived. Yet attempting rescue operations in current conditions would challenge aircraft and crew capabilities beyond normal safety limits. Martinez consulted weather displays that showed conditions at Mercy General's location as marginal for helicopter operations even under normal circumstances, with winds gusting to 85 miles per hour and visibility reduced to less than half a mile due to horizontal rain and debris. Mercy General Alpha 7. Current weather conditions at your location exceed safe helicopter operation parameters. Can patients be moved to ground-level locations that might be accessible by alternative rescue methods? Dr. Chun's answer eliminated any possibility of avoiding the high-risk helicopter mission that everyone in the operations center had been hoping to prevent. Miami Emergency. Negative on ground-level evacuation. Hospital basement and first floor are completely flooded with contaminated water reaching 8-foot depths. Second and third floors have sustained structural damage that makes them unsafe for patient movement. The rooftop helipad is our only viable evacuation point, and we estimate maximum 30 minutes before deteriorating conditions make any rescue attempt impossible. Director Hammond arrived in the communications center as Martinez was coordinating with flight operations to assess available aircraft and crew options for what was clearly becoming the most challenging rescue mission in the department's history. Hammond's expression reflected the weight of command decisions that could result in losing both patients and rescue personnel if executed incorrectly, or losing patients through inaction if not attempted at all. Martinez, what's our current aircraft status for potential rescue operations at Mercy General? Hammond asked, her voice carrying the controlled tension of someone whose experience with catastrophic emergencies had taught her that successful outcomes often depended on making decisions with incomplete information under impossible time constraints. Operations reported availability that highlighted the gap between theoretical emergency response capability and actual operational options during extreme weather conditions. Director Hammond, our primary rescue helicopters are grounded due to wind speed limitations and visibility restrictions. The AS-350 and Bell 206 aircraft cannot safely operate in current conditions, and crew safety protocols prohibit missions in winds exceeding 75 miles per hour. The news that primary rescue aircraft were unavailable forced consideration of alternatives that had been dismissed during routine planning as unnecessary backup options that represented poor resource allocation. Hammond's attention turned to the single aircraft that remained technically available, though its capabilities for extreme weather operations remained unproven, and its pilot assignment represented a complication that she had been hoping to avoid. What's The status of Aircraft 47 Delta and contractor pilot Hollins? Hammond inquired, her voice carefully neutral despite the personal history that made this question particularly significant. Has the Huey been cleared for potential rescue operations? And is pilot Hollins available for immediate mission assignment? The answer came from Flight Operations Supervisor Walsh, whose administrative review of contractor pilot arrangements had revealed information that raised more questions than it answered about Leonora's qualifications and federal authorization. For emergency operations, Director Hammond, Aircraft 47 Delta has completed pre-flight inspection and is technically available for operations. However, contractor pilot Hollins has not been cleared for missions exceeding normal safety parameters, and the aircraft has not been certified for extreme weather rescue operations. Hammond's decision process was complicated by personal knowledge of Leonora's capabilities that conflicted with official documentation and bureaucratic protocols that prioritized liability protection over operational necessity. During Hurricane Andrew, she had witnessed Leonora conducting rescue missions in conditions that had grounded all other aircraft, but those operations had been conducted without authorization and in violation of established safety procedures. Dr. Chun's increasingly desperate transmissions provided a countdown. That eliminated time for extensive consultation and bureaucratic review processes. Miami emergency. Patient condition is deteriorating rapidly. We have one pediatric trauma case with internal bleeding requiring immediate surgical intervention. Weather conditions here are becoming impossible, with wind gusts now exceeding 90 miles per hour and debris creating extreme hazards for any aircraft approach. The medical crisis that Dr. Chun described represented exactly the kind of situation that emergency response systems were designed to address. Yet current conditions exceeded the operational parameters for equipment and procedures that had been optimized for cost-effectiveness rather than maximum capability. Hammond faced the classic emergency management dilemma of choosing between unacceptable risks and unacceptable outcomes. Lieutenant Colonel Wright approached Hammond with tactical assessment information that highlighted both the challenges and potential solutions for conducting rescue operations under current conditions. Director Hammond, I've completed analysis of approach routes and landing zone conditions at Mercy General. The mission is technically feasible, but requires aircraft and pilot capabilities that exceed our normal operational parameters. Wright's assessment revealed that successful rescue operations would depend on flying techniques and aircraft handling that weren't taught in standard helicopter pilot training programs, requiring experience with extreme weather operations that few civilian pilots possessed. The approach to Mercy General's helipad requires navigating between high-rise buildings in crosswinds that exceed design limits for most aircraft. Landing zone dimensions are minimal, with obstacles that eliminate normal safety margins for pilot error or equipment malfunction. The tactical challenges that Wright described matched exactly the kind of mission profile that Leonora had successfully completed during Hurricane Andrew, though her techniques had been criticized as reckless by safety officers who prioritized adherence to established procedures over mission accomplishment. Hammond's memory of those operations included successful rescues that had saved lives while violating every protocol designed to protect aircraft and crew. Lieutenant Colonel Wright, in your professional assessment, what are the minimum pilot qualifications and aircraft capabilities required for successful completion of this rescue mission? Hammond asked, her question designed to establish whether current resources could accomplish the mission or whether alternative approaches needed to be considered. Wright's answer reflected military training that had taught him to distinguish between optimal mission parameters and minimum acceptable standards for accomplishing critical objectives under adverse conditions. Director Hammond, this mission requires a pilot with extensive experience in extreme weather helicopter operations, preferably including actual combat or emergency rescue experience in similar conditions. The aircraft needs to be simple, reliable, and forgiving of pilot error, because normal safety margins don't exist under current conditions. The description of required pilot and aircraft qualifications matched Leonora and the Huey helicopter almost perfectly, though Hammond's reluctance to authorize the mission reflected both legitimate safety concerns and personal history that complicated her assessment of acceptable risk levels. Her experience during Hurricane Andrew had taught her that some missions could be accomplished through individual initiative and skill levels that exceeded normal safety parameters, but at personal costs that were difficult to justify through standard risk-benefit analysis. Dr. Chun's final transmission eliminated remaining time for debate and forced immediate decision-making that would determine whether 6 patients received life-saving medical care or became casualties of a storm that had exceeded all preparation and planning assumptions. Miami emergency. This is our final transmission. Weather conditions are now beyond our ability to maintain communications. We have patients who will not survive without immediate evacuation. If rescue is possible, we need it now. The silence that followed Dr. Chun's transmission was profound and loaded with implications that extended far beyond the immediate medical emergency. 6 lives hung in the balance, with rescue operations that could save them requiring capabilities that existed within the department's resources but exceeded approved operational procedures and safety protocols. Hammond stood at the center of the operations center, surrounded by personnel whose professional competence was unquestionable but whose training and equipment had been optimized for normal emergency operations rather than catastrophic events that pushed human and mechanical systems beyond design limits. The decision she was about to make would either save lives through accepting extraordinary risks or potentially cost additional lives through attempting missions that exceeded reasonable safety parameters. "Get me contractor pilot Hollins immediately," Hammond ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose experience with catastrophic emergencies had taught her that some situations required capabilities that couldn't be measured by normal standards. "We're going to find out if that death trap helicopter can do what our modern aircraft can't." The hangar fell into absolute silence when Leonora Hollins walked through the main doors at exactly 3:45 p.m., her weathered flight suit and calm demeanor creating a stark contrast to the frantic energy that had consumed emergency operations personnel for the past hour. Behind her, Hurricane Miranda's outer bands lashed the building with rain that sounded like machine gun fire against the metal roof, while wind gusts strong enough to move aircraft rattled the massive doors with each atmospheric surge. Chief Flight Coordinator Marcus Rodriguez stood near the operations desk, surrounded by flight crews whose expressions reflected the frustrated helplessness of highly trained professionals forced to watch patients die because weather conditions exceeded their aircraft's operational capabilities. The most experienced pilots in the department had spent the past 30 minutes reviewing approach routes and landing procedures for Mercy General Hospital, only to conclude that the mission was impossible with available equipment and current safety protocols. "Mrs. Hollins, we have a critical situation that requires immediate assessment of your aircraft's capabilities for extreme weather rescue operations," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose command decisions would determine whether 6 people lived or died within the next hour. "I need your honest professional opinion about whether Aircraft 47 Delta can accomplish a mission that our primary helicopters cannot safely attempt." Lieutenant Jake Morrison, whose confidence had been shaken by the morning's revelations about Leonora's qualifications, approached the group with mission briefing materials that painted a sobering picture of the challenges facing any rescue attempt. Morrison's military experience had taught him to recognize the difference between difficult missions and impossible ones, and current conditions clearly fell into the latter category. "Ma'am, I've completed tactical analysis of the approach routes and landing zone conditions at Mercy General," Morrison explained, consulting tablet computers that displayed real-time weather data and aerial photographs of the hospital complex. Wind speeds at the landing zone are sustained at 95 miles per hour with gusts exceeding 110. Visibility is less than 200 meters, and debris fields make normal approach patterns impossible. Leonora studied the mission briefing materials with the methodical attention of someone whose survival had often depended on understanding every aspect of challenging flight conditions before committing to operations that offered no margin for error. Her weathered hands traced approach routes on the aerial photographs, while her experienced eye calculated wind patterns, obstacle clearances, and emergency escape options that might not be apparent to pilots trained on modern aircraft with computerized navigation systems. Lieutenant Morrison, what's the current status of patients requiring evacuation? Leonora asked, her voice maintaining professional calm, despite growing awareness that she was being asked to attempt a rescue mission in conditions that would challenge even her extensive experience with extreme weather helicopter operations. Are we dealing with time-critical medical emergencies, or can patients potentially wait for improved weather conditions? Morrison's answer eliminated any possibility of delaying the rescue mission until conditions improved or alternative evacuation methods could be arranged. Ma'am, Dr. Chun reported 6 trauma patients, including 2 pediatric cases requiring immediate surgical intervention. Medical assessment indicates that patients cannot survive transport delays beyond approximately 30 minutes from current time. The medical timeline that Morrison described meant that any rescue mission would need to be launched immediately, with no opportunity for extended planning, weather improvement, or consultation with higher authorities who might provide guidance based on previous experience with similar situations. Leonora's decision would need to be made with information currently available, under conditions that exceeded normal safety parameters for any reasonable pilot. Director Patricia Hammond entered the hangar with the purposeful stride of someone whose emergency management experience had taught her to recognize critical decision points that would define the success or failure of entire response operations. Hammond's expression carried the weight of command responsibility during catastrophic events, but her eyes held something else when they focused on Leonora recognition, mixed with emotions that had been carefully suppressed for 3 decades. Contractor Pilot Hollins, I believe we need to discuss your assessment of current mission requirements and aircraft capabilities, Hammond announced, her voice carefully professional despite the personal history that connected the current crisis to events that had shaped both women's careers during Hurricane Andrew. I also need to understand your willingness to accept responsibility for operations that exceed normal safety protocols. The conversation that followed would determine whether 6 people received life-saving medical care or became casualties of a hurricane that had exceeded all planning assumptions and operational preparations. Hammond and Leonora faced each other across decades of shared history and professional disagreements that had never been resolved, while Hurricane Miranda provided a backdrop of wind and rain that emphasized the urgency of decisions that could not be delayed or delegated. Director Hammond, I understand the medical urgency and weather conditions that define current mission parameters, Leonora replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone whose capabilities had been tested under conditions that few pilots would voluntarily accept. Aircraft 47 Delta is capable of operations in weather that grounds more sophisticated helicopters, but successful mission completion requires piloting techniques that aren't taught in standard training programs. Hammond's response revealed both administrative authority and personal knowledge of Leonora's capabilities that complicated official assessment of acceptable risk levels during emergency operations. Mrs. Hollins, I need your professional assessment of mission success probability under current conditions. Can you accomplish this rescue mission, or are we discussing a suicide mission that will cost additional lives without saving the patients we're trying to help? The question that Hammond posed captured the essential challenge facing emergency response operations during catastrophic events, distinguishing between missions that were extremely dangerous but achievable through exceptional skill and experience, versus missions that were simply impossible regardless of pilot capabilities or aircraft performance. Leonora's answer would determine whether patients received their only chance for survival or whether additional rescue personnel joined the casualty list. "Director Hammond, I can complete this mission," Leonora stated with absolute certainty, her voice cutting through the wind noise and frantic activity that filled the hangar with authority that came from decades of successful operations in conditions that other pilots couldn't imagine attempting. The Huey helicopter is specifically designed for operations in extreme conditions, and my experience includes successful rescue missions during Hurricane Andrew using identical aircraft under similar circumstances. The mention of Hurricane Andrew triggered immediate reactions from personnel who understood the historical significance of operations conducted during that storm, though few were aware of the specific circumstances that had connected Hammond and Leonora during the most challenging emergency response in Florida's history. Morrison's expression showed confusion about references to events that predated his military service, while Rodriguez demonstrated the respect that experienced pilots accorded to legends, whose achievements were remembered long after their retirement. "Mrs. Hollins, Hurricane Andrew operations were conducted without official authorization and in violation of established safety protocols," Hammond replied, her voice carrying undertones that suggested personal involvement in decisions that had affected those historical missions. "Current circumstances require adherence to departmental procedures that prioritize personnel safety alongside mission accomplishment." Leonora's response revealed both professional frustration and personal conviction about the appropriate balance between safety procedures and operational necessity during genuine emergencies that threatened lives through inaction as much as through excessive risk-taking. "Director Hammond, Hurricane Andrew taught me that some situations require capabilities that exceed normal safety parameters. 6 people are going to die if we prioritize bureaucratic procedures over mission accomplishment." The hangar filled with tension as personnel processed the implications of what they were witnessing. A confrontation between official authority and individual expertise that would determine whether emergency response operations succeeded through exceptional effort or failed through adherence to procedures designed for normal circumstances rather than catastrophic events. Lieutenant Colonel Wright approached the group carrying communications equipment that brought real-time updates from Mercy General Hospital, where Dr. Chun's medical team was fighting to keep trauma patients alive while weather conditions deteriorated beyond all previous experience. "Director Hammond, we've lost radio contact with Mercy General. Last transmission indicated that patients have less than 20 minutes before medical conditions become irreversible. The communication loss that Wright reported eliminated remaining time for extensive consultation and debate about risk assessment and safety procedures, forcing immediate decisions based on information currently available and personnel ready for deployment." Hammond faced the classic emergency management scenario where inaction guaranteed unacceptable outcomes, while action carried risks that could result in additional casualties. "Mrs. Hollins, if I authorize this mission, what do you need for successful completion?" Hammond asked, her voice reflecting the weight of command decisions that balanced individual lives against systemic responsibilities for personnel safety and organizational liability. "What support requirements and operational parameters are necessary for you to attempt this rescue?" Leonora's response demonstrated both technical expertise and operational humility that came from understanding the difference between confidence in personal capabilities and recognition of factors beyond individual control during extreme weather operations. "Director Hammond, I need immediate clearance for departure, direct communication with the medical team at Mercy General, and authorization to use flight techniques that may appear to violate normal safety procedures but are necessary for successful completion under current conditions." The authorization that Hammond was being asked to provide extended far beyond routine mission approval, requiring her to accept responsibility for operations that exceeded established safety protocols, while trusting individual pilot judgment over departmental procedures that had been designed to minimize liability exposure rather than maximize operational capability during catastrophic events. All personnel, clear the flight line for immediate departure of Aircraft 47 Delta, Hammond announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose experience with catastrophic emergencies had taught her that some decisions required accepting extraordinary risks to achieve essential objectives. Contractor pilot Hollins is authorized for emergency rescue operations, using whatever techniques necessary for mission success. As Leonora moved toward the Huey helicopter that would either save 6 lives or become part of the tragedy that Hurricane Miranda was riding across South Florida, the assembled emergency response personnel understood they were witnessing the moment when theoretical capabilities would be tested against conditions that pushed both human skill and mechanical systems beyond all normal limitations. The transformation in Leonora Hollins was immediate and profound as she approached the weathered Huey helicopter with movements that shed decades of apparent frailty and uncertainty. Gone was the hesitant civilian consultant who had arrived that morning seeking acceptance from younger pilots. In her place stood someone whose bearing and confidence commanded instant respect from everyone watching. Her pre-flight preparations under conditions that would have paralyzed less experienced aviators. Flight Operations Supervisor Janet Walsh stood beside the helicopter with credentials verification equipment, her tablet computer displaying federal authorization codes that she was still struggling to comprehend fully. The classification levels and operational authorities listed in Leonora's documentation exceeded Walsh's security clearance, revealing capabilities and experience that transformed their understanding of who they were dealing with during this crisis. Mrs. Hollins, I'm receiving real-time verification from Federal Emergency Management Authority that shows your pilot credentials include classifications I've never encountered before, Walsh announced, her voice carrying a mixture of professional curiosity and growing awe as additional information appeared on her screen. The system is indicating that you hold operational authority for aircraft and missions that are classified above my access level. Leonora paused in her inspection of the Huey's rotor system to address Walsh's questions with the patient professionalism of someone accustomed to working with personnel who lacked complete information about classified operations and specialized capabilities. Supervisor Walsh, my background includes helicopter operations that were conducted under federal programs not typically discussed in civilian emergency services. What matters now is whether this aircraft can accomplish the mission we're facing. Maintenance Chief Tommy Brennan emerged from the helicopter's cargo compartment, carrying equipment modifications that he had been implementing based on Leonora's specific requests for extreme weather operations. Brennan's expression reflected the fascination of someone whose understanding of aircraft capabilities was being expanded through observing preparations that went far beyond routine emergency procedures. Mrs. Hollins, I've completed the modifications you requested for weight distribution and emergency equipment placement, Brennan reported, consulting a checklist that detailed changes to standard rescue helicopter configuration. I have to admit, some of these modifications aren't in any manual I've worked with, but they make sense from an engineering perspective for the conditions you're planning to encounter. The modifications that Brennan described represented Leonora's adaptation of standard rescue helicopter configuration for operations in weather conditions that exceeded normal design parameters, incorporating techniques developed during military operations where mission success took priority over equipment preservation and standard safety procedures. Her requests had initially puzzled Brennan, but his implementation of the changes had revealed innovative approaches to aircraft performance optimization. Chief Brennan, extreme weather helicopter operations require equipment arrangements that prioritize mission accomplishment over passenger comfort and routine safety margins. Leonora explained while conducting inspections that covered systems and components most pilots never examined personally. When you're flying in conditions that push aircraft to design limits, every detail of weight, balance, and emergency equipment placement affects mission success probability. Lieutenant Colonel James Wright approached the aircraft carrying communications equipment that would provide direct contact with Dr. Chen's medical team at Mercy General Hospital, enabling real-time coordination during what would certainly be the most challenging rescue mission in the department's history. Wright's military background had taught him to recognize the difference between standard emergency operations and missions that required capabilities beyond normal training and equipment parameters. Mrs. Hollins, I've established direct communication with the medical team at Mercy General, Wright reported, adjusting radio equipment that would allow coordination between aircraft and ground personnel during approach and landing phases of the rescue operation. Dr. Chun confirms that patient conditions continue to deteriorate, and weather at their location is approaching the limits of human survival on an exposed rooftop. The communication capability that Wright provided was essential for successful completion of a rescue mission where normal navigation aids would be useless and visual references would be limited to whatever could be seen through horizontal rain and debris that reduced visibility to distances measured in feet rather than miles. Leonora's approach to Mercy General would depend on voice guidance from medical personnel who could provide information about wind conditions and obstacles that weren't apparent from aircraft altitude. Director Patricia Hammond arrived at the helicopter carrying documentation that revealed the complete truth about Leonora's background and the federal authority that had brought her into current operations. Hammond's expression showed the complex emotions of someone confronting personal history while managing a crisis that threatened to recreate the same challenges and conflicts that had defined her career during Hurricane Andrew 30 years earlier. Mrs. Hollins, I've received complete verification of your credentials and operational authority from Federal Emergency Management Command, Hammond announced, her voice carefully controlled despite the personal significance of information that connected current events to decisions that had haunted her professional conscience for decades. Your federal designation is confirmed as Special Operations Pilot, Level 7, with authority for emergency operations that supersede normal departmental protocols. The federal authorization that Hammond described eliminated any remaining bureaucratic obstacles to Leonora's rescue mission, while revealing capabilities that explained her confidence in attempting operations that other pilots considered impossible. Special Operations Pilot Level 7 represented the highest civilian emergency response qualification, requiring experience and skills that few pilots possessed and fewer still maintained through continuing operations. Director Hammond, federal authorization doesn't eliminate the risks involved in this mission. Leonora replied, her voice carrying both professional humility and absolute confidence in her ability to accomplish what was being asked of her. However, it does provide legal protection for operations that may appear to violate standard safety procedures, but are necessary for successful mission completion under extreme conditions. The legal protection that Leonora referenced was crucial for operations that would push aircraft and pilot beyond normal safety margins, providing cover for techniques and procedures that were essential for extreme weather rescue but would normally trigger investigations and potential liability issues under standard departmental protocols. Hammond's authorization of the mission carried personal and professional risks that extended far beyond the immediate emergency. Lieutenant Morrison approached the group carrying weather updates that showed Hurricane Miranda continuing to exceed all previous projections for intensity and forward motion, creating conditions at Mercy General that were deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. Morrison's expression reflected the growing urgency of a situation where delays measured in minutes could determine whether patients survived long enough for rescue to be attempted. Mrs. Holland's latest weather data shows sustained winds at Mercy. General now exceeding 105 miles per hour, with gusts recorded at 125. Morrison reported, consulting meteorological information that painted an increasingly dire picture of conditions at the rescue site. Visibility has dropped to less than 100 meters, and debris fields include roofing materials and street signs that pose extreme hazards for any aircraft attempting approach. The weather conditions that Morrison described represented the absolute limit of what any helicopter could survive, requiring piloting techniques and aircraft handling that existed nowhere in current training programs and had been developed only through actual experience with similar situations during previous catastrophic events. Leonora's ability to complete the mission would depend on skills that couldn't be learned through simulation or classroom instruction. Lieutenant Morrison, I appreciate the weather update and hazard assessment, Leonora acknowledged while completing final preparations that included equipment checks and emergency procedures review that went far beyond standard pre-flight requirements. Extreme weather helicopter operations require accepting conditions that normal safety parameters are designed to avoid. Success depends on understanding how to use those conditions rather than fighting against them. The philosophical approach to extreme weather flying that Leonora described represented techniques developed during military operations where mission accomplishment required pilots to work with atmospheric conditions rather than waiting for weather that met normal safety standards. Her confidence in attempting the rescue mission was based on experience that had taught her to find stability and control within apparent chaos. Flight Coordinator Rodriguez joined the group as Leonora completed her final preparations, his expression showing both professional respect for her obvious expertise and personal concern about authorizing operations that exceeded every safety protocol designed to protect aircraft and personnel during emergency operations. Rodriguez's command experience had taught him to balance mission requirements against acceptable risk levels, but current circumstances offered no clear guidance for appropriate decision-making. Mrs. Hollands, as Chief Flight Coordinator, I need your final assessment of mission feasibility and success probability under current conditions, Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose authorization would determine whether the rescue mission proceeded or whether patients at Mercy General were abandoned to die due to weather conditions beyond normal response capabilities. Can you honestly tell me that this mission has reasonable chance of success? Leonora's response would determine whether 6 people received their only opportunity for survival or whether emergency response personnel accepted that some situations exceeded human capabilities regardless of equipment, training, or individual expertise. Her answer carried the weight of personal reputation, professional responsibility, and moral obligation to attempt rescue operations when failure to act guaranteed tragic outcomes. Chief Rodriguez, I can complete this mission, Leonora stated, with absolute certainty, her voice cutting through wind noise and emergency preparations with authority that came from successful completion of similar operations under comparable conditions. The Huey helicopter and my experience represent capabilities specifically designed for situations that exceed normal safety parameters. Those 6 people are going to live because someone is finally willing to use equipment and techniques for their intended purpose. As Leonora climbed into the pilot's seat of the ancient helicopter that everyone else had dismissed as a death trap, the assembled emergency response personnel understood they were about to witness either the most extraordinary rescue mission in their department's history, or a tragedy that would demonstrate the fatal consequences of attempting impossible operations under conditions that pushed human and mechanical systems beyond all reasonable limits. The Huey's turbine engine spooled up with a mechanical roar that cut through Hurricane Miranda's fury like a defiant challenge to the storm that had grounded every other aircraft in South Florida. Leonora Hollands sat in the pilot's seat with her hands moving across controls with the fluid precision of someone whose muscle memory had been developed through thousands of hours in similar cockpits under conditions that most pilots would consider UNSURVIVA at 4:23 p.m. With wind speeds exceeding 110 miles per hour and visibility reduced to mere yards, Leonora lifted the aging helicopter from Miami-Dade Emergency Operations Center into atmospheric conditions that seemed more suited to spacecraft than conventional aircraft. The Huey immediately began fighting crosswinds that would have overwhelmed computerized flight control systems. But Leonora's manual piloting techniques turned the helicopter's apparent vulnerability into an advantage. Miami operations, Thunder 77 departing for Mercy General Hospital. Leonora's voice crackled through radio, communications with calm professionalism that provided confidence to ground personnel monitoring what everyone understood was either a rescue mission or a suicide flight. Estimated flight time 12 minutes. Request priority emergency frequency for coordination with medical personnel on arrival. The radio call sign that Leonora used triggered immediate recognition among military personnel monitoring emergency frequencies, identifying her as someone whose operational authority exceeded normal civilian pilot qualifications. Thunder 77 was a federal emergency response designation, reserved for pilots whose capabilities had been proven under conditions that challenged the limits of human skill and aircraft performance. Flight Operations Supervisor Walsh tracked Leonora's progress on radar displays that showed the Huey helicopter as a barely visible blip moving through weather conditions that had rendered normal navigation aids useless. The aircraft's flight path appeared erratic to observers unfamiliar with extreme weather flying techniques, but experienced pilots recognized the controlled precision of someone using wind currents and atmospheric disturbances to maintain forward progress toward the rescue site. Director Hammond, Aircraft 47 Delta is maintaining course toward Mercy General, despite wind conditions that exceed design specifications for helicopter operations. Walsh reported, her voice reflecting amazement at observing flight techniques that weren't taught in any training program she had encountered. Pilot Hollins appears to be using hurricane winds to assist rather than hinder aircraft performance. The flight technique that Walsh observed represented Leonora's adaptation of military combat flying methods for civilian emergency operations, using atmospheric turbulence and wind shear as navigation aids rather than obstacles to be avoided. Her approach to flying through Hurricane Miranda demonstrated understanding of aerodynamic principles that allowed her to find stability within apparent chaos through techniques developed during operations where survival depended on working with extreme conditions rather than avoiding them. Inside the Huey's cockpit, Leonora maintained radio contact with Dr. Chun's medical team while navigating through a maze of high-rise buildings that created wind tunnels and downdrafts capable of destroying aircraft that approached Miami's urban landscape using conventional flight patterns. Her conversation with the medical personnel provided essential information about conditions at the rescue site, while offering reassurance that help was approaching despite circumstances that seemed to preclude any possibility of successful rescue. Mercy General Medical Team. This is Thunder 77 approaching your location from the southwest. Leonora's transmission cut through static and interference that reflected the electromagnetic chaos created by Hurricane Miranda's massive electrical activity. I need current wind direction and velocity at your rooftop landing zone, plus any observations about debris fields or obstacles that might affect approach and departure. Dr. Chen's response painted a picture of conditions at Mercy General that were deteriorating beyond human endurance, with medical personnel struggling to maintain patient care while exposed to weather that had exceeded all previous experience. With hurricane-force winds and driving rain that reduced visibility to distances measured in arm lengths rather than visual references. Thunder 77. Winds at our location are sustained at approximately 115 miles per hour from the northeast, with gusts that are moving medical equipment and threatening patient safety. Dr. Chun's voice carried through radio communications that were breaking up due to atmospheric interference. We have debris, including roofing materials and tree branches, creating extreme hazards around the landing zone perimeter. The hazard assessment that Dr. Chun provided confirmed that landing at Mercy General would require navigation through a three-dimensional obstacle course of flying debris and wind conditions that exceeded safe operational parameters for any reasonable pilot using standard helicopter approach techniques. Leonora's successful completion of the rescue mission would depend on flying skills that existed nowhere in current training curricula and had been developed only through actual experience with similar combat and emergency operations. Mercy General, Thunder 77 beginning final approach to your location, Leonora announced as the Huey carved through wind currents that were strong enough to flip aircraft that didn't compensate for atmospheric forces that changed direction and intensity with each passing second. Medical personnel prepare patients for immediate loading. Maximum time on ground will be 90 seconds due to weather conditions and aircraft limitations. The approach to Mercy General's rooftop helipad showcased flying techniques that amazed everyone monitoring the rescue operation through radio, communications and radar tracking that barely maintained contact with the helicopter as it disappeared, into rain and debris that rendered normal surveillance equipment nearly useless. Leonora's navigation through Miami's urban landscape required dead reckoning and visual references that existed only during brief moments when visibility improved enough to identify landmarks. The final approach phase demonstrated why Leonora had earned Special Operations Pilot designation through successful completion of missions that other aviators considered impossible. Using the Huey's mechanical simplicity and proven design characteristics to accomplish what computerized aircraft couldn't survive under current atmospheric conditions. Her landing technique used wind resistance and rotor disc loading in ways that turned Hurricane Miranda's fury into controllable aerodynamic forces. Thunder 77 touching down at Mercy General Landing Zone. Leonora's radio call was barely audible through atmospheric interference, but ground controllers tracking the mission understood. They were witnessing the successful completion of a helicopter approach that should have been impossible under current weather conditions. Medical team commence patient loading immediately. We have minimal time before departure required. The patient loading operation proceeded with military efficiency despite conditions that challenged human survival on an exposed rooftop where hurricane winds created an environment more hostile than most combat zones. Dr. Chun's medical team had prepared patients for rapid transfer using techniques developed during disaster medicine training, but nothing had prepared them for loading trauma victims into a helicopter while fighting winds strong enough to knock people off their feet. Thunder 77, all patients loaded and secured. Dr. Chun's transmission confirmed successful completion of the most dangerous phase of the rescue operation, though departure from Mercy General would prove equally challenging as atmospheric conditions continued to deteriorate beyond all previous measurements. Medical personnel aboard and ready for immediate departure. The departure from Mercy General demonstrated Leonora's mastery of helicopter aerodynamics under extreme conditions, using rotor disc angle and power management to achieve liftoff. Despite wind loadings that exceeded aircraft design specifications, her technique for transitioning from ground contact to controlled flight required precise timing and aircraft handling that existed nowhere in standard pilot training because normal safety protocols prohibited operations under comparable conditions. Miami Operations, Thunder 77 departing Mercy General with 6 patients plus medical personnel. Leonora's radio call confirmed successful rescue completion, while beginning the return flight through weather conditions that had intensified during the ground operation, requesting priority approach clearance and emergency medical services standing by for patient transfer. The return flight to Miami-Dade Emergency Operations Center showcased Leonora's ability to maintain aircraft control while managing a cargo of critically injured patients whose medical conditions required smooth flight characteristics under circumstances where atmospheric turbulence would normally make passenger comfort impossible. Her flying technique compensated for hurricane winds through precise power management and flight path selection that minimized stress on both aircraft and passengers. Flight Operations Supervisor Walsh monitored the helicopter's progress with growing amazement as radar tracking showed the Huey maintaining course and airspeed, despite weather conditions that had forced suspension of all other aviation activities throughout South Florida. Director Hammond, Thunder 77, is maintaining stable flight path with full patient load despite conditions that our meteorology section describes as beyond measurement capability. The successful completion of patient transport through Hurricane Miranda represented vindication of Leonora's confidence in both her own capabilities and the Huey helicopter's suitability for extreme weather operations that exceeded the performance envelope of more sophisticated aircraft. Her techniques for flying through catastrophic weather conditions demonstrated that experience and skill often mattered more than advanced technology when human survival depended on successful mission completion. Miami Operations, Thunder 77 requesting immediate landing clearance for emergency medical transfer. Leonora's final radio transmission confirmed that the impossible rescue mission was approaching successful completion despite weather conditions that had grounded every other aircraft in the region. All patients stable and ready for immediate transfer to trauma center facilities. As the Huey approached Miami-Dade Emergency Operations Center with its precious cargo of rescued patients, ground personnel who had watched the mission unfold understood. They had witnessed helicopter flying that would be remembered and studied for decades as an example of what human skill and determination could accomplish when lives depended on exceeding every normal limitation and safety parameter. The Huey helicopter touched down at Miami-Dade Emergency Operations Center at 5:17 p.m. with the gentle precision of someone parallel parking a car. Despite having just completed the most extraordinary rescue mission in South Florida's emergency response history, Leonora Hollins shut down the turbine engine with movements that showed no trace of the stress and physical demands that would have left younger pilots exhausted and shaking. After fighting Hurricane Miranda's fury for nearly an hour, emergency medical teams swarmed the aircraft as soon as the rotor blades stopped turning. Their urgent efficiency focused on transferring 6 trauma patients whose lives had been saved through flying techniques that everyone present understood they would probably never witness again. Dr. Sarah Chun emerged from the helicopter's cargo compartment with an expression that combined professional satisfaction with personal amazement at having survived conditions that had exceeded every parameter for human endurance. Those patients are alive because someone finally had the courage to attempt what everyone else said was impossible. Dr. Chun announced to the assembled medical personnel as trauma victims were loaded onto waiting ambulances for transport to PU trauma center facilities equipped to provide definitive care. The pilot of that helicopter just accomplished what I'll be telling my grandchildren about for the rest of my life. Director Patricia Hammond approached the aircraft as Leonora completed post-flight procedures with the methodical attention to detail that characterized pilots whose long careers had been built on never taking survival for granted, regardless of mission success or personal accomplishment. Hammond's expression carried emotions that had been building for 30 years, finally finding release through witnessing vindication of capabilities that she had once doubted during Hurricane Andrew. Mrs. Hollins, on behalf of Miami-Dade Emergency Services and the families of 6 people who are alive tonight because of your actions, I want to express gratitude that goes beyond official recognition or professional courtesy, Hammond said, her voice carrying sincerity that reflected personal transformation as much as administrative appreciation. You've just demonstrated that some capabilities transcend age, equipment limitations, and bureaucratic procedures. The gathering crowd of emergency response personnel, who had witnessed the mission through radio communications and radar tracking, began to understand the historical significance of what they had observed. Recognizing that Leonora's rescue operation would become legendary within aviation, serves as an example of what individual skill and determination could accomplish when lives depended on exceeding normal limitations and safety parameters. Lieutenant Jake Morrison approached Leonora with the respectful demeanor of someone whose understanding of pilot qualifications had been permanently altered through observing capabilities that exceeded everything he had learned during military training and civilian emergency operations. Morrison's earlier skepticism had been replaced by professional admiration that reflected recognition of expertise that couldn't be measured through standard qualification metrics. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology for questioning your capabilities this morning," Morrison announced, his voice carrying the humility of someone whose assumptions had been proven wrong in ways that provided valuable lessons about the difference between apparent qualifications and actual expertise. "What you accomplished today will change how I think about flying for the rest of my career." Leonora's response demonstrated the gracious professionalism of someone whose confidence in her own abilities had never required validation from others, though she appreciated recognition when it was offered with sincerity rather than obligation. "Lieutenant Morrison, questioning capabilities is appropriate when lives depend on accurate assessment of pilot qualifications. What matters is that those 6 patients received the care they needed." Chief Flight Coordinator Marcus Rodriguez emerged from the operations center carrying preliminary reports that documented the rescue mission's success while highlighting the extraordinary nature of what had been accomplished under conditions that exceeded all previous experience with emergency helicopter operations during catastrophic weather events. Rodriguez's expression reflected both professional satisfaction and personal amazement at having authorized operations that had resulted in perfect mission completion. "Mrs. Hollins, initial analysis of your flight path and techniques during this rescue operation indicates that you used methods that aren't documented in any current training manual," Rodriguez announced, consulting tablet computers that displayed flight data and communication records from the mission. "We'd like to work with you to develop training materials that could help future pilots understand extreme weather flying techniques." The offer to document Leonora's flying techniques represented recognition that her capabilities filled gaps in current pilot training that had become apparent through the afternoon's events, demonstrating that some skills couldn't be learned through classroom instruction or simulator training but required actual experience with conditions that tested human and mechanical limits under circumstances where failure meant death. "Chief Rodriguez, I'd be honored to work with your training department to develop appropriate instruction materials," Leonora replied, her voice reflecting satisfaction that came from knowing her experience could contribute to improving emergency response capabilities for future pilots facing similar challenges. However, the most important lesson from today isn't about flying techniques. It's about understanding when bureaucratic procedures need to be set aside for mission accomplishment. The philosophical point that Leonora raised captured the central issue that had defined the day's events, highlighting the tension between safety protocols designed to minimize liability exposure and operational necessity during genuine emergencies that required capabilities beyond normal parameters. Her successful rescue mission had demonstrated that some situations demanded individual initiative and expertise that exceeded standard procedures. Maintenance. Chief Tommy Brennan conducted post-flight inspection of the Huey helicopter with obvious curiosity about how the aging aircraft had performed under stress conditions that would have challenged newer, more sophisticated machines. Brennan's examination revealed that the helicopter had not only survived extreme weather operations, but had actually performed better than he had expected based on pre-flight condition assessment. "Mrs. Hollins, this aircraft shows minimal stress signs despite operating in conditions that should have pushed every system beyond design limits," Brennan reported, his voice reflecting professional amazement at discovering that proper piloting techniques could enable older equipment to outperform newer machines under extreme conditions. You've proven that experience and skill can overcome equipment limitations that we assumed were insurmountable. The technical assessment that Brennan provided validated Leonora's confidence in both her own capabilities and the Huey helicopter's suitability for missions that exceeded normal operational parameters, demonstrating that advanced technology wasn't always necessary for successful completion of challenging operations when pilots understood how to maximize aircraft performance through proper technique and experience. Budget coordinator Frank Morrison approached the group with the uncomfortable expression of someone whose cost-benefit analysis and efficiency optimization had been proven inadequate by events that demonstrated the value of maintaining capabilities that appeared unnecessary until catastrophic circumstances revealed their importance. Morrison's administrative focus on fiscal responsibility had contributed to key decisions that nearly prevented the day's successful rescue operation. Mrs. Hollins, I want to acknowledge that today's events have shown me the limitations of financial analysis when applied to emergency response capabilities, Morrison announced, his voice carrying the humility of someone whose professional assumptions had been challenged by results that couldn't be reduced to spreadsheet calculations. Your mission has convinced me that some capabilities are worth maintaining regardless of their routine cost-effectiveness. The acknowledgement that Morrison offered represented a broader recognition within the department that emergency response systems required capabilities that extended beyond normal operational requirements, maintaining equipment and personnel that might appear unnecessary during routine operations, but proved essential when catastrophic events exceeded standard response parameters. Dr. Chun returned from the trauma center with medical updates that confirmed the life-saving impact of Leonora's rescue mission, providing concrete evidence of how individual expertise and willingness to accept extraordinary risks had resulted in outcomes that justified every decision made during the afternoon's crisis. The patients who had been rescued from Mercy General were receiving definitive medical care that would enable full recovery. Mrs. Hollins, trauma center physicians confirmed that all 6 patients are responding well to treatment and are expected to make complete recoveries. Dr. Chun announced, her voice carrying the emotion that reflected both professional satisfaction and personal gratitude for having witnessed heroism that had saved lives through capabilities that exceeded normal human parameters. 2 of those patients are children who will grow up because someone was willing to attempt the impossible. The medical outcomes that Dr. Chen reported provided final validation of the decisions that had enabled Leonora's rescue mission, demonstrating that accepting extraordinary risks during genuine emergencies could result in saving lives that would otherwise be lost through adherence to procedures designed for normal circumstances rather than catastrophic events requiring exceptional response. As Hurricane Miranda continued its destructive passage through South Florida, the successful rescue operation at Mercy General Hospital became a beacon of hope that demonstrated how individual expertise, properly maintained equipment, and willingness to exceed normal safety parameters could achieve mission success when lives depended on capabilities that transcended standard bureaucratic procedures and risk management protocols. 3 months later, Leonora Hollins was recognized by the Federal Emergency Management Agency with the highest civilian award for heroism during natural disasters, though she insisted that the real recognition should go to emergency response personnel who were willing to authorize operations that exceeded normal safety procedures when human lives were at stake. Her rescue mission during Hurricane Miranda became required study material for emergency pilots throughout the country. The aging Huey helicopter that everyone had dismissed as a death trap was restored to full operational status and designated as the department's primary aircraft for extreme weather operations. with maintenance procedures upgraded to ensure its availability for future missions that might require capabilities beyond those of more sophisticated but less robust modern helicopters. Director Patricia Hammond implemented policy changes that emphasized operational capability over cost-effectiveness when procurement decisions affected emergency response readiness, ensuring that future budget discussions would include consideration of capabilities needed during catastrophic events rather than focusing exclusively on routine operational efficiency. The legacy of Leonora's impossible rescue mission extended far beyond the 6 lives saved during Hurricane Miranda, inspiring changes throughout emergency response systems that recognized the value of maintaining capabilities that appeared unnecessary until catastrophic circumstances revealed their essential importance for protecting human life when normal methods proved inadequate. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.